Josie.
Josie.
How's it going?
Fantastic. How are you?
I'm so good.
Thanks so much for joining with us today.
Oh, I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. How was your trip?
Oh my gosh, it was so much fun.
I was following all the food.
As was everybody else.
Yes, the food was it good? Was it as good as it looked?
You know what? It was delicious. Now, the super famous barbecue place, Franklin's, was closed for their annual vacation, so fine, whatever. But everything else, yeah, it was delicious.
And you were down there for a week in Texas?
Yeah, 9 days.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
it's been 6 years since my husband and I have had a trip, just the two of us. So he was I was like, so we're gonna go Sunday to Sunday? He's like, oh no, we're gonna go longer than that. And he pushed for 2 weeks, and I was like, nah, nope, that's too much.
How do you do when you're away from work? Do you long to get back to work, or are you no, I'm good, I can separate? And
You know what? In the first it's a little bit of his anxiety letting go, and then it's I'm just fine without it.
Mhm.
But then after a couple days, I think it's the anxiousness of getting back. Okay, I've rested. I'm
Yep.
ready to get back to work.
I'm at a 3-day shelf life. Anything past 3 days, I'm finding ways to get back involved and hey, do you guys need help? And what can I do? And have you thought about this?
If I did not have my Sarah, it would be totally different. But I have so much confidence in her, and she is on it, that she lets me do that. But it is definitely I start to get it's when you rest and settle down and the creative juices start coming, and you're okay, I'm ready to get back.
Yeah, 100%. And then how's your dog? Did you get your dog back yet, Willow?
Well, we pick her up on Friday.
Okay, got it. So are you excited?
Yes, we are puppy proofing the house the next 2 days.
Yes, awesome. So you got the shots, all that good stuff.
Yes, finding a veterinarian. I set up the kennel and got the bed out and stuff. My youngest has just been laying in the kennel, just watching his iPad, waiting. And I was like, well, maybe it'll help with my two-legged children. Go to your kennel. Okay.
That's awesome. Yeah, when I got a dog, it was quite the ordeal at our house, and the potty training and all that good stuff.
Yes. However, I trained a child with autism, to go potty in the toilet, and he was 5 and then 6 when he finally started pooping in the toilet. So I feel like I'm ready I can handle a dog.
You can do it. You can totally do it.
Totally.
So I wanted to talk to you today about, and I think I personally, this is me personally, I love your story, right? Where you started as a hygienist. So you started in the chair, and you went on to help run an amazing organization, a dental organization. Then you pivoted to a tech company, and then you pivoted again to an entrepreneur / kind of everything. And to me, it's just an amazing story, right? I see people trying to work through that, and to see you at the end of it. And I know you're not the end of your story, but just to know that process, I just think it's super helpful to people, and I just enjoy it. So would you mind walking us through that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I graduated hygiene school in 2007 from San Juan College in New Mexico, and did clinical work for 9 years. And I really loved taking care of my patients, but the repetition was a little bit much for me. My personality doesn't fit real well in that. I also really struggled because sometimes I felt there was a ceiling, that it was I don't become RDH2 or anything like that. And I think that's one of the things I'd like to try to solve in dentistry, is that we attract really ambitious people, but sometimes there's not a great career ladder within clinical, and I'd love to see that change. But anyway, so I was a clinical dental hygienist. I started exploring other options. I was actually in education. So I taught at the school that I graduated from, and that was a lot of fun. I would take the senior students on different rotations, so special needs clinics or the nursing home or different places like that. Then started just doing some speaking and some writing, and talked a lot about treating patients with autism in dentistry just because of my son.
Yeah.
And then kind of the first really big pivot was starting to do some consulting and coaching with a company in Washington. So I was on a 5-function team, and we would pull data from the practices and work with the dentist and understand what their goals were, and then really help chart a path and hold them accountable to that. So that was a really good experience. Yeah, go ahead.
Quick question. How did you move that? Like, that was a quick move, right? So it's like you're in the chair and then now you're consulting. How did that happen? Like how did you, and I'm really interested in what you said. You said you weren't a personality fit for hygiene. So how did you come to that conclusion of like, hey, I'm unhappy, or what is it? And then how did you make that pivot to consulting?
Yeah. So unfortunately, it was like, I remember very vividly, I hadn't even been out a full year, and I'd been working full time. And I remember it was at the end of the day, and I'd cleaned up, and I kind of just like stood and like stared around my operatory, and I asked myself the question, is this it? Like, my student loans weren't even paid off. And it was like, I knew it at the top of the hour. I was getting a new patient back at 5 after. We were doing health history. We were doing blood pressure. We're doing like, and my day was just charted for me. And so I just, I kind of struggled with that, and didn't love that. So then I did start exploring other options. So I was actually really involved with like the ADHA or the NMDHA. So I was actually the president of the New Mexico Dental Hygienists Association, just like a year and a half out of school.
Wow.
And so understanding like the governance of hygiene, dental hygiene, and some of the political landscape. And so that's where I also got some experience in leadership and working with dentists. And one of the things I was probably really set me up for what I did in working with dentists is, at that time, the Hygienist Association and the Dentist Association kind of hated each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when we would sit in a room together, it was like the hygienists were on one side of the table, the dentists were on the other, and they, like, you could feel the tension. And they would always go to legislative session with opposing bills for expanding the scope of hygiene practice or whatever. And so like the politicians kind of got sick of it and were like, you guys have got to come together. So we created a liaison.
When a politician is telling you guys need to clean up your relationships and you're not working together well, you guys need to learn to play together better, that's a problem.
It is a problem. So we ended up creating a liaison committee with the Dentist Association, the Hygiene Association, and my team. And it was like, it started out really rocky, but we went that year for the first time ever with legislation together, which was awesome. So I think I had some early on situations that kind of set me up for how is it best to communicate in difficult situations? How can we come together when we feel like we're on separate, sides of an issue? So anyway, actually how I just jumped, from one to the other with education and the political stuff to the consulting is we moved from New Mexico to the Pacific Northwest. So we moved to Portland, Oregon. My brother lived there. We were looking for a place that was just bigger and had more resources, especially for kids with special needs. But we still had family there so we could have support because he does have special needs. So we moved there, and I actually, it was kind of one of those like fate things where it was before we were in New Mexico. We knew we were moving. We didn't know how we were going to do it. Like, my husband was quitting his job of 10 years. We were just taking this leap of faith because we felt like it was the right thing for our family and for our son. And so I was up at 5 a.m. I was picking my sister-in-law up to go to the gym. And I had this very distinct thought, look at the job boards. And I was like, that's weird. It's 5 a.m. So I picked up my phone while I was waiting for her. I opened up Indeed, and I saw this position for Director of Professional Development for a dental consulting company. And as I read through it, I was like, oh my gosh, this has got to be so perfect. This is made for me. So I started to apply, and I got this email that said, oh, only, we have a lot of applicants and only the best candidates will even hear from anybody. Well, I was like, yeah, that's not good enough. So I started researching the company online, and I started connecting with the team members on LinkedIn. And I was like, maybe if they see my name or they're talking about it, maybe it'll start to be familiar. And then I just started doing research on the company and on the CEO, and I found all these YouTube videos and whatever, and I just sent him a private message was like, hey, I want you to know, like, I'm moving, I'm a hygienist, I've, just come across your stuff. I love what you're doing. I think it's incredible. I've just applied for a position. And immediately I got a reply back that was like, I'm connecting you with my VP of operations. Thank you so much for reaching out. So, get creative when you're trying to connect with people. So
break all the rules, right? When they're like, don't apply, don't reach out to the main person, don't do that. Just skip all that. Just go straight, do your thing. That's awesome.
But I did it like I researched his company. I knew about him. I knew what his message was. I really was impressed by it. So he showed up to my first interview, which I found out later was like a really big deal. So anyway, that's how I got that job and, worked there. And it was a really good learning experience. That's where I actually met Eric and Clifton of Carolina's Dentist.
Got it.
So they were clients of mine and I was coaching them and I just really connected with them. The CEO pulled me aside and said, I'm going to give you this new client. They're not happy. Do whatever you can to make them happy. And I said, okay. So I started attending their leadership meeting weekly, virtually, did that for almost a year. Eric called me one day and said, nobody's ever been able to hold us accountable like you can. We need you as part of our company. What would it take for you to come to North Carolina? So we moved from Washington State to North Carolina, moved the whole family across the country. I had to go first for a couple of months without my family. And so that was really hard, but, it paid off in the long run. And thankfully my family's just super supportive. And so I was director of hygiene. I was director of people. I was director of operations. And then I was the integrator the last bit or COO before I exited after our transition.
Got it. And so you were dealing with messy politicians and you fixed that, you cleaned that up probably best as you could, right? And then you got up to Oregon and you went in and you had a messy situation again, it sounds like. And I know this about you personally. In full disclosure, I work with Josie. Josie helps me with my business. So, and I'm messy. It's super messy. So it sounds like you're cleaning messes, right? And you're fixing things to the point where people are like, wow, this was a disaster. And now you're fixing it. So you leave Carolina's Dentist and you fixed it, right? You guys did amazing what you guys were able to do there. The de novos, and a lot of people know that. And then what happened after that? What was your next phase from there?
Yeah. So actually, we at CD, we were customers of Dental Intel. And we used Dental Intel. We were operating on EOS, or Entrepreneurial Operating System. Data is a big part of that. We started using Dental Intel in like March of 2017. So they were still also a new company. And we just really figured out how to make it work for us. Our team was really engaged. Our team loved it. So one day I got a call from Scott Livingston and he said, hey, we have changed internally how we operate based on what we've learned from you guys as customers. Our CEO, Weston, would really like to come out and meet you and see what you guys are doing. And I said, absolutely, we love visitors. And so I got to decide, where Weston was, what he was doing. So I wanted him to attend our level 10 meeting, or our leadership meeting that we have once a week. So he came and he watched all of that. And afterwards he said, I've never seen anything like that. You have to come work for me. And I said, well, actually, I'm really happy. I love what I do. I love this company, but, thanks so much for thinking of me. And then for 2 more years, he continued to hey, really want you to work for Dental Intel. Would love to bring you on. And so with the transaction of CD, my position was changing. But more than that, Ethan was 16 years old. We only have a couple of years left of school. North Carolina was not serving him. The entire reason we moved around the country was primarily for him. We had the opportunity for a special school potentially for Ethan that I could see from Dental Intel. And so
So everything kind of lined up to really help your son and help your family.
Yeah, it was absolutely, that was the primary driver in me exiting from Carolina's Dentist, was just to provide for Ethan. It's really, really hard to say goodbye.
Yeah.
Especially when they were getting really great support from Lightwave and financial backing, that they have just grown exponentially since then, and done some really amazing things. So anyway, we came out here, worked for Dental Intel, got to do lots of, great things. I was here primarily to build an educational program for office managers. And you know what? Things changed over time a little bit as we were working through things. The pandemic hit, and it was like everybody, I'm sure just, I know I felt it, but I know other people were feeling it too, this obligation to help and this obligation to do whatever I could. And I had spoken at DEO the fall before. I talked about being an integrator. I talked about EOS. I'd done several workshops on EOS. So when quarantine happened and everybody was shut down, I started to have dentists reach out to me that said, I know you know EOS. I know you know how to run a dental group. I'm scared. I'm worried. I have time. I don't know how we're going to scale this business. I don't know how we're going to survive. Would you implement EOS with us? So I took on a couple of clients, and then it was just more of that like soul searching, what am I meant to do? Where is my greatest impact? And felt that it was in taking that leap of faith to provide services directly to dental groups. So Eric and I also started working on joyFULL People.
Which just really quickly, I work with several of your clients, and you've done an amazing job with all the people that I've worked with. You've helped them not only grow, but help them numerically, but you've helped them grow business wise too. So you just have an amazing gift again of coming in and solving those kind of things. So I don't want to just brush over that. That's a big part of you and what you do when you step onto the scene. So I think that's huge. So sorry to break up the pattern there. So you're doing EOS, and then you start talking to Eric, and what happens from there?
So Eric and I worked really, really well together at CD. And so we actually started putting together some content when COVID hit, because we'd had the experience of being shut down by a hurricane and being cash poor and a growing business and all of these things. And so we started just putting some content together around like helping people maybe change their mindset about COVID and about their business, and some tips and tricks and things to prepare for and look at your operations and stuff. And we kind of had this like moment that it was kind of funny that we'd never really dawned on us before. What everybody would always come to us about was people. And it was culture. And it was like, how do I have a high performance culture, but one that's also healthy? So we started putting together and recognizing how much, like intellectual property, I guess, we had around it, and the systems that we had built to really take something that feels so like touchy-feely or amorphous or whatever that you can't quite put your finger on it, and systemize some things that when you operate in these systems, the culture turns out to be really, really strong and really healthy with happy people, and you get more out of them. And they feel better about coming to work, and they're excited to come to work. So we started building joyFULL People. So now we have two branches, right? We've got Traction for Dental, which is EOS implementation. We have joyFULL People. So the goal was always that we anticipated that joyFULL People would actually be kind of like the long-term, big picture program that we really focused on. And EOS was something we all loved and cared about, and we'd operated in for 5 years. So we knew it. We knew how to apply it to a group of hygienists, to the front office team, how to teach it to other associates, which tools mattered most. So that just grew very, very quickly. My practice as an EOS implementer, I grew in about 6 months, what it takes many people about 2 years to build.
It's crazy.
I think that speaks more to actually the need for it in dentistry versus like it's a Josie thing. It's just that people need it. And they were so glad to have somebody with a dental background who also knew the operating system and could teach them how to use that. So at the end of the year, beginning of the year, we were very, very clear about what our vision was for this year. It was to create a group practice of implementers with a dental background who were trained in EOS to support growing dental practices / groups. So that was all very, very clear. The other thing that we looked at is, as you look at what we call the accountability chart in dentistry, you've got finance, operations, marketing, culture, people, HR. When dental groups are growing, sometimes they get stuck, and before they can really bring in that person full time, they really kind of hobble along. So we looked at that and realized we could provide fractional services, whether through strategic partnerships like SMC or people internally like fractional integrators to support growing dental groups. So that was all like clear and ready to go. And then we had our annual session. It was 2 days. Day 1 was great. We were ready to go into day number 2, completely planned, ready to go with our 1-year plan. And we found out that night EOS Worldwide was moving to a franchise agreement. So we found out, we saw the news about 9 p.m. We were up until 1 a.m. trying to sort through it and figure out what that meant for us. And it was things were not clear around branding. Things were not clear around, could you have a firm or a group practice, and any like ancillary or additional type services. So completely understand why EOS had to do it. But we got the franchise agreement in March. And then for 90 days, we read that 164-page document almost every day. We had lots of people look at it. We looked at various different sides of the issue. And it was like, it was so hard because EOS is ingrained in us and who we are and what we do, and we believe in the system. And then we were actually sitting at an EOS Worldwide conference. Gino Wickman is on stage. Gino Wickman is talking, and he's giving his like, here's my advice to live a happy, healthy life, right? And the first one is make your decisions as 10-year decisions. And so if you're stuck trying to figure something out, you need to look out 10 years and you need to make that based on 10 years. And we were like, well, okay. If that's the case, we do know eventually we'd like to create a dental specific operating system. We do know that we would like to take the beautiful things that we love about EOS, like having a clear vision, having good values, what's a good meeting cadence. But so many people came to me because they wanted like, how did you, like, they want to know the dental stuff that I built out. They want to know like, you know, how should I measure my hygiene department, or when should I centralize?
Which has nothing to do with EOS, right? Like that's a total separate thing.
Right. And so, and we'd also had all of this brand confusion with what is Joyful People, what is EOS? A lot of people still don't even realize it. Like, what is the difference? And that's because we had to keep them very separate because we were abiding by EOS intellectual property law. I was always very, very careful and mindful and followed their system to provide a pure experience, right? And so like if I brought in things that I had built previously for the dental group, it was always like, hey, outside of the session, I can share this with you. Or, you know, it was almost like I would wait until people were in so much pain with their people that I'd say, well, I have Joyful People, rather than just integrating it from the beginning when I knew they needed it, because I was sticking to what was appropriate, calling myself an EOS implementer. So I had some really great conversations with close, trusted advisors and clients, you being one of them, and just said, hey, you know, I'm faced with this situation. If there's a fork in the road and you get either more EOS purity from me, or you get Joyful People and more of my dental specific stuff, and it's more integrated in, what's more valuable to you? And they said, we will take Joyful People and dental all day long.
Yep.
So we decided to not sign the franchise agreement, which was a really big decision. I'd become very like integrated in the EOS community. It was like, it was emotional for me because
it wasn't something you wanted to do, right? Like this is something that was the situation. Yeah. It was a hard decision.
Yes, it was. And I fell in love with just EOS Worldwide and the people in the community. And it was really hard for me because it'd become part of my identity, I guess. You know, just like it was hard to not be an integrator anymore. It was hard to, you know, not do this. So we decided not to do that. And we have decided to partner with an incredible organization and combine our resources. And we're going to build the dental operating system. And so that's what the future is.
That is so cool. That is like, I obviously we never want people to go through hard things or have to make hard decisions, but sometimes those hard things bring the most beautiful things, right? And I know, like, I don't know how much you can go into all of it, but I know kind of the direction that you're going, and it's so exciting and it's so needed. People are hungry for this, to your point. And yes, there are some system things, and yes, there are some different parts of it that I know that you guys are building out, but it's just needed. Like someone needs to systematize it. So I'm excited for you guys, and I can't wait to see how that all unfolds. So we'll probably leave that as a cliffhanger for next time. But one thing that you touched on, and I didn't want to stop you through your story because I wanted to get to the climax there, is you said measuring and systematizing, and this is actually in my notes to talk to you about measuring and systematizing culture. And I know you have like strong opinions about this, right? So could you help if someone just never heard of Josie, never heard of anything that we just talked about, and they own a business, they own a dental office, what does that mean, measuring and systematizing culture? If I have one practice or 10 practices or 100 practices, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm. So what that means is, it's all backed by research. I'm kind of a nerd in research, especially with team engagement, people engagement, workforce type stuff. And the greatest economic challenge / disparity that we're facing is not anything regarding like efficiencies that like in the past Six Sigma or whatever could solve for us, right? It's actually all about empowering and unleashing human potential. So most people don't know how to empower human potential. I mean, you see where dental groups are growing. We know that within a practice, you have so much work and so much more that they could probably double revenue, double profitability if they could harness their people and unleash their energy and have them all rowing in the same direction. But instead they grow by just acquiring more business, right? Just buying more practices rather than trying to like really refine and maximize what's within even that location. Go ahead. What were you saying?
Yeah, I was going to say, we just did another podcast, and the way somebody else explained it is we've gotten in the habit of just throwing more people or money at it. Right. So it's just like, oh, that thing's broken. We'll put 4 people to do this job that one person should do, or it should be maybe even automated, and we'll just keep throwing. So yeah, I'm fascinated by what direction you're going.
So, and that's not just in dentistry. That is business in general, that it is just this conglomeration and acquiring things and putting them together, because nobody knows how really to unlock or unleash that energy and that potential. And so while dealing with human beings can be messy or complicated, or we just don't quite know. I mean, you ask a business owner, how did you learn how to manage your finances? They'd probably tell you something. How did you learn how to do an implant? Dentist. How did you learn? And it's like, I went to this school, I did this program, I did this, whatever. How did you learn how to manage people? There's nothing out there. They don't know how to do that, right?
Yep.
And so we have recognized through, I will say, we failed a lot. Trial and error and figuring it out. But also having me been a team member in like a toxic environment, but also being, an employee, but then also in a leadership.
You've been on all ends of the spectrum. Yes. You've been the leader. You've been the one who couldn't control your destiny, who couldn't make changes. You've lived on all ends of the spectrum.
Right, you got it. So and what are the habits, right? We talk about systems or processes. I would say, what are the habits that we have? How often, even if it's like, what are we talking about and how often are we talking or meeting with people? But what are the patterns, the habits, the systems, the things that even if you don't know all of the nuances of, maybe you don't have a lot of great emotional intelligence or you don't read people really well, even if you follow these patterns or these systems and do these things, you're going to have a healthy culture, meaning you're going to get more out of your team members because they are going to be engaged. Because none of us want to go to work and be disengaged or be miserable or not feel like our talents are being utilized.
Yeah.
Right? So team members want it just as bad as owners and leaders want it, but we don't know how to bring them together. And so when I talk about systemizing it, it is like, how can we bridge that gap and create those healthier relationships? What are the habits or the things that we should do on a regular basis that lead to greater outcomes in the performance of people?
So if someone's just peeking in and you didn't know their business, but let's say it is a toxic environment, they know it, their team knows it. Obviously the business owner has to take that first step, right? They're the ones that have to make the decision. I want to change this. What are 3 things or 1 thing or something? What would be the first thing that you would say, go do these things to fix that environment?
I have thought about the order of operations. How would I simplify what I've done several times? And number 1 starts with clarity in what you want. So as a business owner, what is the vision for your business, right? Why does it exist? what are you trying to accomplish and what are the values? Your values represent your people and who's the right person for you. And so getting really clear on vision and values. So internally, as an owner, figuring out, hey, I've taken the risk to open this business. I believe that, business for good is that's what we need. Businesses can make a huge impact on our world. So first, getting clear about that. Number 2 is all about clarity and structure. So, it is taking and getting super clear, like, what is the structure of my organization? What makes the most sense? Taking all names out of it, right? Like, I have people build the structure of their organization first.
So you're talking like an org chart or accountability chart?
Org chart, right. Okay. So a lot of people just have people doing lots of things and they're not really, really clear about who's accountable for what. So we have marketing, we have operations, we have finance, whatever that is. And then building out, what are my expectations of what needs to get done, right? Or needs to be accomplished in the business without the person's name on there. And then only after you've built your structure and you have clarity on who needs to do what, who's accountable for what, how we're measuring success, then we start to decide who's going to be the right person for that. And then it's like starting to, once you've got people in that, having regular meetings, talking about the right things, giving them tools to empower them. But so it's like sometimes there's just this like mechanical, like you've got to have some meetings, you've got to have some clarity. Once we kind of get rowing in the right direction, then we start focusing on the cultural stuff. So connecting with your team in ways you've probably never connected with them, measuring their performance and coaching them either up in or out of their position.
Got it. So really quickly on the values and vision, how would you, and you've been in other industries and you've seen other kinds of businesses, how would you rate dentistry as a whole, not the people that you work with, but just as a whole when you're talking to them, how dentistry does in making sure that their vision is clear and their values are clear?
Well, since that is like what I do all day, every day, I would say that we're not great at it. Where we just kind of assume that because we're in dentistry and the thing that we do is fix teeth, that is our vision. But often the visions in the teams and the people that I work with, their vision doesn't have a lot to do with dentistry. Like it's the thing they do, but they're actually trying to accomplish something greater with their people or in their community than just fix teeth. It's more about empowering people or, increased health or whatever it is. People make the mistake. Values is one of the biggest kind of like myths, things that I think that they think that their values need to be like patient facing. We're committed to excellence and high clinical care and quality. Those are not core values. That's like a brand promise. And you know what? Every single dentist says they're committed to quality.
Yep.
So it's not anything that differentiates you. So your values really, they should not be generic. They don't have to be patient facing. That's how you should be hiring, firing, and reviewing your people. That represents your culture. People talk a lot about culture and core values. When you live your core values and you really have the right ones, that becomes your culture. And so people want culture as a core value. Culture is not a core value.
It's like being awesome as a core value or something like that, right? And it's yeah, that's so good. Okay, so and then what about on the clarity and the structure side? Because obviously, first thing you said when you said structure, first thing that went to my mind is like, oh, we got DSOs and we have group practices and then we have the individual doctor. But that's not what you're really talking about, right? You're talking more about inside the office where I live if I'm a team member there. So how would you grade the industry as a whole of how we're doing there? And then what could someone do to just really improve that if they wanted to make it better?
There's like this extreme where the really large DSOs, they've figured it out, right? Because they've got the business savvy, the experience, they've had to figure that out. But almost like, and then it's like even solo practices, it's pretty simple as far as like we've got a lot of people think of their departments as front office, dental hygiene, dental assistants, and doctors, right? That's what they think of when they think of departments. So what's really interesting is as you have dental groups growing, when you have like 1 or 2 locations, when they start to add in 3, 4, or 5, they have to switch from this like office, thinking of just the office level, to more like the management company becomes a separate company almost than what the practice is doing. And it's a hard transition to go from we've just operated these silo practices to what are we actually doing as a dental service organization, as a leadership team of a group practice, as a management company. So, when they transition to that, it's like, even when I help them build their scorecards, they think they need to have, if they have 10 offices, they think they need to see production for each office. When it's helping them think more globally, like, no, like, what is just production for the entire company? And they're like, you just want me to look at one number for 10 practices, like just whole production? Yes, absolutely. That's what I want you to look at. We're going to delegate down who's looking at it at the office level. So as far as structure, it gets a little squirrely when you're going from a couple of locations to a group. But once they kind of shift and break those like boundaries that we've created for ourselves, it gets a little more clear. However, what I will also say is many people, one of the biggest mistakes I see in growing dental groups is that they're not clear what the deliverables are to the office from the management company. So am I doing it for you? Am I doing it with you? Am I just supporting you? Is it all being centralized? And they make the mistake of trying to think that everything has to be centralized, but then they take things away from the office that they like doing or they're really good at.
Or that needs to be at the local level, right? Like there's things that have to be at the local level to treat the patient. Totally. And then something on that front too, is it something that I've seen, and I'm curious if this is kind of what you're talking about, is people who, when you move from being a single practice or even 2 or 3 practices and you try to move to the more of the DSO or the centralizing things outside of the clinical, it's almost like it's like the mindset of you're working in your business versus working on your business. So you're taking people out of the office and you're not working in dentistry anymore. You're working over the top of dentistry, providing services. Do you see that? And is that kind of what you're talking about, that transition? And then how do people break through that? How do you get somebody through that?
A lot of it's also a matter of, we see this a lot, whether it's a front office person becoming an office manager or an office manager becoming regional, or in this case, a dentist becoming a CEO or, office manager becoming regional. Many of us are at that point where we can take that position because we've been really good at doing. Right. And so it's like, I know all the answers. I can fix all the problems. I can come in. And it's a very, very different set of skills to delegate and to coach and manage and let people learn. We're not very good about letting people learn. We don't teach them, the way that adults learn. We don't let them try it out. We jump in and rescue them when we need to just let them try it. We have a lot of mistrust in leadership versus team. So there's a lot of things. So can they break through it? Absolutely. Some of that is actually getting these very simple systems in place where it's like, we're going to have this meeting and this is what we're going to talk about. And this is how we're going to structure our organization. Who is accountable for what? Office manager is accountable for this, so you have to learn to let go. So sometimes it's just encouraging people that like how to delegate or how to let go of things and not feel like they have to control it.
I love that, and definitely needed. So one of the things that you touched on was scorecards. So what are some of the top things that you're watching on a regular basis? And I know this is a big deal because I've seen scorecards that are hundreds of pages long, literally. And I've also seen scorecards that are like, oh, we just look at these 2 things, right? And I've seen everything in between. What are from Josie, if you're working with somebody, you walk into a practice cold turkey, what are the things that you want to look at right away to see what the health of that practice is?
Yeah. So one of my answers, I'm sure everybody gets tired of me saying, is it depends. So it does depend. However, if I'm coming in like, okay, here, I'll bring it down a little bit. When we would start looking at practices and we would connect with their analytics, and we would start looking at practices to know, is this a practice that we want to purchase?
Yeah.
Right. So if we're talking about the health of the practice, the first metric that I look at is pre-appointment. Now, pre-appointment is defined. Now, this is a dental intel definition, but it is of my active patients, right? And active patients is defined differently, whether, some practice management systems say a patient that's been in within 24 months is active. Some data analytics, like even Dental Intel, says 18 months. After 18 months, they're not active. So however you define that, your active patients, what percentage of them have a next appointment? And so that is the first one that I look at, because that one lets me know if they've got pretty good processes and systems, first of all, but are they keeping track of their patients? So if somebody calls and cancels, do I have a method to follow up with them? If they don't want to schedule treatment today, do I have a method and a way to track them and keep up with them? And am I doing that? So, this could take us down a rabbit hole where people come to you because they say, I want new patients,
Yep.
And they think new patients covers all wrongs in the practice.
Yeah.
And yet they have an entire practice worth of patients
Sitting
that
there.
if they would just keep up with them and reach out to them and engage with them, they might not need to be spending as much money on marketing with new patients.
100%. If your operations is tight, you don't need as much money in marketing. And it's like going to the dentist, right? So when you go to the dentist, they say, brush your teeth, floss, and don't eat these foods. And then you won't need the dentist as much, right? And so if you listen to that and you follow it, then you don't need the dentist as much. Same thing with marketing. You don't need as much marketing if you go through and do the things that Josie's talking about. So what is that? So that active patients percentage for next appointment, what's the magic number that you're like, you are uber successful if you hit this number, or does that vary as well?
So I base it on some of, because I've been so connected with Dental Intel and used them for so long, they put out benchmarks that I like to look at, because they take, of all of the thousands of practices that they have data for, they set some benchmarks against them. So I definitely see practices now getting up into like the 70% as they're focusing on it. But mine is like, you have to, until you get that at 65, we don't need to worry about some other things. That's one of the first things that we need to do. So I'll look at pre-appointment. The next one I'll look at is hygiene reappointment. So that one is what percentage of your hygienists are reappointing their patients before they leave that day, right, in the chair. And while you ask any dentist, especially if they're not tracking anything, how many of your patients are you reappointing? They're going to say 100%.
Yeah, 99%, 92%.
Oh, yeah. They're also going to say their case acceptance is like 80%. And I'm going to call yes on that.
Because that's what it feels like to them, right? When you're in the chair, it feels like every person reappointed and almost everybody said yes to treatment. That's what it feels like.
And unless they're tracking and measuring performance, they don't have any clue because they're not in the room. So hygiene reappointment is the next one that I look at. My benchmark on that one is 90%. And so
that's a global number, right?
That's a global number.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So with that one, let's say that we start working with a practice and they are at 70% reappointment, hygiene reappointment. Even if we bump that up 10% to 80%, that practice is going to be double the size in 5 years.
It's crazy. So we've done the numbers. What we're finding, it's something that we track at SMC, is we track recare for marketing new patients. And what we're finding is most of these practices, even the ones that are ran pretty well, are down in the like 40, 50% of their marketing patients. And it's not because they're not great. It's just because those patients take a little bit more TLC than a patient referrer or somebody who's already coming back, right? And so I ran the numbers on it. If you keep your marketing recare low like that, you're just keep hitting a glass roof. You can't scale. On the flip side, if you fix it and you go to 80 or 90%, all of a sudden you don't even need barely any marketing to keep the motors running. So I am super passionate about that particular metric, and you're spot on. You will grow like crazy.
Absolutely. So those are like the top two that I start to look at. When it gets a little bit deeper, a lot of people will start, dentists in particular, back to the new patient thing. We would have dentists come to us and say, my production was down, my paycheck was down. It's because you're giving the other doctors more new patients. Well, we were always like, the patient comes first. So whatever fits in their schedule. And we had this brand promise like today or tomorrow. So I'm sorry if you're booked, I'm going to get that new patient in today or tomorrow. However, what we found is their production was not like, it didn't matter the number of new patient exams, it was recare exams. So if they got a little lazy or didn't plan their time well and they were just not doing recare exams, that's when we saw production.
So what was the metric that you're tracking for that to watch that?
I don't know that I have a great one, but it was always like just pulling it and saying like, how many recare exams are you actually doing? Are you going in every time you've got, because, even I would work in some practices that the doctor would think, oh, I'm too busy. I don't need to do a recare exam every 6 months. I'm just going to do the once a year that I have to. But if they would actually do it every 6 months, and I don't know if this is actually something that we made up. I would have loved to know the validity of this, but our feeling was always like by the third recare exam, that's when patients start to really accept treatment. So you've just got to keep nurturing that relationship until they're ready for it. We also had kind of a different view. A lot of people will get super into like case acceptance and how much did I diagnose versus how much did I treat? And some of that is so squirrely because dentists who's had training in like sleep and implants and, functional type stuff, they're going to diagnose very different than a new dentist who is even afraid, has not been trained in doing some of those things.
Yeah.
So in comparing dentists, I would actually look at it a little bit different, where I would start to see like, what is their average accepted per patient? But then I would start to look at how much were they diagnosing, because there's this kind of, I've heard a lot of people talk about if the treatment plan's too big, there's like this sweet spot, right? Of like not too much, not too little. I don't have a lot of opinions on that, but I would go through and look and say like, how much on average are they diagnosing if I saw that there was an outlier that was super low.
And are you looking at all their patients, new patients?
Yeah, we just lumped it together.
Lumped it all together. Perfect. Okay. And then,
go ahead.
Was it provider by provider? You're just kind of looking at it and going, okay, this is your spot? Because again, to your point, if a dentist has more skill in a particular area, they may be presenting way more treatment. So is that how it is? Literally just we're going through each team member?
So we were all about stacking our providers against each other. So dentists from multiple locations, we wanted them also to see what the other person was doing, because sometimes I feel like I'm working at the top of my level and there's no way I can do any more until I can see somebody else is producing, 500,000 more a year. Well, what are you doing? Yeah. How are you doing that? And so it kind of raises their belief lid, if you've ever heard of I think the John Maxwell thing. So we were all about that, but it would help me kind of, we had a model where our doctors they would do, they were like kind of super GPs where they would do everything. And so in models where there's a big difference, it's a little harder to compare them across the board, but looking at their historical, right? Like if when you started, you were diagnosing a lot more, and now you're diagnosing a lot less. Is there a confidence issue? Is there you're just running around too fast, you don't have time? Like what is, so, looking at those trends over time for the individual is really, really, really valuable.
Awesome. And then what did you guys do that was different than everybody else? So obviously a lot of these things people do, right? And not everybody does them, but people do them. What was some things that you did when you were working in the dental offices that was just different, that like nobody else was doing?
I think that it was, there's a couple things that come to mind, but the overarching thing that comes to mind is really so much time and effort in our people. So we were using things like scorecards, which were important, but we were broken records about our vision and our values. And we also, like, if I made a list for you of the meetings that we had or the cadence that we have, a lot of people are like, no, like that's way too much. However, it was in our connection with people, both individually and as groups, and the constant communication from us, that I think that's why we had this very young team. I mean, we had 200 team members, and at one point, like my oldest dentist was Clifton. At that point, he was 38. And so like
Wow.
99% of our team members, I had 25 and 26-year-olds running a 4, 5, and $6 million practice and doing it really, really well.
Because common knowledge, especially back that was a little while ago, but even now is you can't do that, right? Like how do you make that work? So it was your connection, and then through that connection, what were you doing to build up the clinicians to be able to believe that they could do that? Because they weren't doing it before they got to you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with the doctors in particular, one, we had a really involved like interview process. It was very systemized. It was first on core values, but then it was like, what are the procedures that you do? And if you couldn't already do those things, like we had to be very picky about who we took. So it couldn't be like, I want to do molar endo. It's like, no, you have to do molar endo. So, I think they might have adjusted a little bit, but part of it was their training when they first came in. We had an entire doctor's manual and a bunch of documents that they had to read that in its entirety before they even showed up to do hands-on training with Eric. They would come in, they would do hands-on training with Eric for a few days. It was a lot of like in the front, sometimes it was 2 weeks before we even put them in front of a patient.
Wow.
We had amazing team members that would go through the products. We had really great systems around our dentists, so we knew how we scheduled. We were very clear that we operated 7 to 7. A lot of it is very clear expectations from the beginning. And like, if this works for you, great, you're going to love it here. If this doesn't work for you, it's okay. You don't have to work with us. But then it was things like there was a once a month doctor meeting. That was part of their contract. They had to come to that. There was CE, but there's also social stuff. Like we brought in dinner, they'd have a beer together. Music would be playing loud. We'd have fun. And then they would have CE. So they would do that. There was a lot of mentoring where we would check in with them and find out like, what are your personal career and financial goals? Let's look at some x-rays together. Eric and Clifton would show up when they'd be doing new procedures to support them and mentor them. Then they had one-on-ones with Clifton. And then they had, we had masterminds for our partner dentists where once a month they would come up. I'd teach them about the business. We would pull the curtains back and show them why we made decisions. We had masterminds with our team leads or our office managers. They got weekly communication from us on cascading messages. We had a Facebook group just for dentists, and then one for all of our team that we were constant, like just this constant barrage of communication and an expectation that we were a high performance culture.
So it's over communication is really what it sounds like, is that you guys were not only saying, hey, these are our values, this is where we want to go, this is where we expect you to go, but that was like on as much as you could communicate it as humanly possible in as many different ways. That's huge. So what were, if you were going to give me one wall, what was like one wall that was really hard to break through in that success?
That there a couple of them that come to mind. One of them was that we were disillusioned in thinking that everybody understood our vision and that they were on board and that they trusted us. And it wasn't until we started really leaning in to recognize that for them, what we thought was clear wasn't clear. That's part of the reason we went to that very like overactive communication.
Also before, just to get clear, and I think this will help people, is that so before you were like, yeah, everybody gets it, but they didn't get it. And that's what caused you to do the over communication, which is what made you successful.
Yes, absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Another thing was, again, a lot of it was just that we assumed we had clearly communicated and we had not clearly communicated. Or our ability to hold people accountable. You can't hold people accountable unless you're really, really clear with them. So just, getting more clear over that. In one of the walls or one of the barriers that they addressed was that they wanted to have a partnership model for dentists, right? Mm-hmm. But then they didn't have proof of concept, getting somebody to buy in, and then waiting for there to be like that event that it proves itself and that it was beneficial for the dentist. But even, for some people, one of the things we talked about in preparing for this was like, what are some of the myths that I see?
That was actually one of my questions. I was going to ask you, like, what are the biggest myths that people just are like, yeah, this is true, but it's totally not true?
So one of the myths, like with this, is that partnership models or equity models fix dentist engagement. That's not the case, because some of them don't want to be partners or owners, or they don't understand it. And so they want associates to act like owners, but associates are employees and they don't know how to act like owners. They've never had to make payroll. They've never had to, hire or fire somebody. And so, the myth is that, partnership and equity cures all dentist engagement problems, and it doesn't. So anyway, there was, just figuring out how to create a positive dentist culture, messing some of it up, paying them one way, then having to pay them another way. Some of those things were painful. That we definitely experienced a lot of those things in a lot of trial.
I love that myth, and that is a huge topic of conversation. We could probably do a whole podcast just around that. But I want to go slightly in a different direction. What do you think one of the biggest misunderstanding about culture is? So what is the assumptions that people make about culture? Not necessarily a myth, but just as an assumption that this is how culture works, and then you're like, no, it's either more complicated or it's totally opposite of that.
Well, a couple things come to mind. One is that you cannot delegate, outsource, or ignore it. That it requires a lot of time and attention and intention. And the other one is really that we cannot separate our personal life and our professional life. So, culture is not kombucha and snacks, right? Or casual Fridays.
Ping pong tables.
Yeah, ping pong tables, right? It is not ping pong tables. So there's a lot of flashy things that people say, I have a great culture, because they have these like frivolous things. And yet to me, culture is really about the connection of people. And as leaders and employers, we're not taught, nor do we know how to actually connect with people. And we have this expectation. When you walk through that door, like you leave your crap at home, and yet, if I have a child with special needs and I've been up all night, or he's diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, I can't turn that off.
Or vice versa, if you have a bad day at work and everybody yells at you, you can't just walk home and just be like, hey, everything's great, right? So it goes both ways. So what is your opinion then on this work-life balance stuff that people talk about? Like, what's your mindset on that?
Balance is horse crap. Like, I don't even like the word. It is not balance, it's harmony. Right? And so sometimes my home life requires more of my time and effort. So like last year, my son was diagnosed with celiac disease, and 5 months later, it was Graves' disease. I did not travel, and I really try not to travel. I do a lot of my stuff virtual, because right now my kids need mom home. And so I'm not going to let that keep me from running a successful business or creating incredible value with people. But I had to balance it. I needed to be more focused at home. I needed to let go of things. Then, you know what? Sometimes it's different. And as I'm growing a business, sometimes my business needs more of my time or my attention. And so it's not that I can get off at 5 o'clock every day. I can't turn it off, especially when something comes up. But what is the harmony? Like, if I give a little here, can I take a little there? Is this a season of work? Is this a season of rest? And so I just don't think that we can really balance it, but it needs to be in harmony. So where we have the disharmony or where we get in trouble is when we're not honest about what that is. So if my work team is expecting a lot of me and I'm withholding and they don't know, I've really got some tough stuff that I'm dealing with, and they're expecting, 100% time and attention, or vice versa. Or if my family, I'm not open and honest with them about something that I have going on. So anyway, I think it's you have to kind of give and take.
So it's communication, right?
Yeah.
You have to be able to communicate. I love your mindset on that. And that's actually helped me personally. Now, I happen to work in my house, so I'm always working, but it's really helped me to balance out, and then also understand the people that I'm working with. So I got another question for you. Okay, this is a big one, and I need you to think about this one a little bit. What is your favorite marketing campaign of your whole life? Like anything that's impacted you, you remember it, maybe when you were a kid or whatever it was. What would your favorite marketing campaign of all time?
So I did actually think about this, because when we talked about it before, I was like, I I'm really glad you kind of gave me like to think about. So I will say, like, I definitely love, I don't know if you call it a marketing campaign, but when it's things for like social good, like Tom's, right? Where it was like, give one, get one, or whatever it
Yes.
is, where you buy a pair of shoes and you get another one. I know they've changed it a little bit. Or like there's this makeup company in Utah, it's called Thrive. And instead of cosmetics, it's cause, like Cause, cosmetics. So I love that. I love just the idea. I'm all about that. I'd rather support companies that are doing good in the world. I'll get my business. Or like when Dove did like Real Beauty campaign and started to show like different bodies. I loved all of that stuff.
So you
Now,
like the vulnerability and the participation.
just give me like the real stuff. I think that is important.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you for that. And then where can people find you? So if someone is first time they've ever heard Josie speak and they wanted to learn more about what you guys do, where can they find you?
So many places, and yet so much is changing with our rebranding. So my email is Josie, but my mother decided to make my life difficult. So she spelled Josie differently. I just tell people it's Jose with a Y. So Josey.
I'm getting you a shirt with that. Jose with a Y, and that's what it's going to say on it.
Yes, I love it. So Josie at, also one little thing you got to think of, joyful people, but it's JOYFULL. We decided to name it that because we believe that work life and personal life are not two separate things, and you have to have, fullness in both to have a full life. So joyfulpeople.com. On Instagram, I'm Hygienist in Heels. We've got our traction for dental. We also have Joyful People social media all over. You're going to see some rebranding of that coming up soon.
Exciting. On
Facebook, it's Josey Sewell. I'm the only Josey Sewell in the world if you spell it right, JOSALYN. So anyway, I'm happy to.
We're going to drop all your links in the video. We'll attach all that so people will be able to find you. Thank you so much. Super, super valuable. And thank you for being just transparent and straight up with us. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much for watching today. If you'd like to learn more about SMC or the guests that you listen to, please visit us at smcnational.com.